Talk about industrial growth, chapter 10 here in America. Okay, here we go. Guys, let's rock and roll. Okay, so what are some of the reasons here for industrial growth in America in the late 1800s? We've got, number one, a plethora of natural resources. Things like coal, oil, and iron. You can figure that out. Google it. I think it's Plethora. Yep. Plethora. We also have immigration. People coming in from both Asia and Europe that create a steady flow of workforce. We have, this is an important one here, we have a capitalist mentality in our country that's supported by a laissez-faire approach by the government, which means hands-off. So we've got an environment that's conducive to supporting industrial growth. Yes, Eli.
My question is like, even though it's laissez-faire, why did the government like bail out like GM and stuff like that when they're out of in debt? Why do they do that if it's laissez-faire?
This was.
I know. I'm saying like nowadays, is it still laissez-faire?
No, definitely not.
All right. Well, I was just checking.
Well, some people still shoot for that, but not as laissez-faire as it was back then. We also had a lot of ingenuity during this time. Of course, ingenuity talking about creativity, sparking designs here. We have 440,000 patents. 440,000 patents that took place. .440,000. The 1800s were known for a lot of inventions. We have Thomas Edison's invention factory, and so those all play roles into why we have industrial growth. We also have another factor here is the railroad. We've got with the railroads, and I have the numbers here. Does your Fast Track to 5 number, does that have the numbers in there as well too, or no? For what's that? There was, yeah. Is it over like because mine's wrong right here. Like 1865, I have 35,000 miles. In 1900, I have 20,000 miles. So I think I should have had another zero there, shouldn't I? All right, 200,000. That might sound right. Please check that for me. Just look at the numbers. It's in your FTT5. So just double check that. Put them in your notes. Put a little note there to self. All right. So issues with land here, or with the railroads, why they're important here. Number one, some of the things you have to know is there's land claiming that's involved with railroads. Railroad companies were granted land claims the size of Texas, essentially, right? They get a swath of land to go through, and they get miles on each side of it.
It said in the book it was over 150,000. In
1900?
Of new track.
Of new track was added. So So right around 200,000 then, all right? Okay. 1865 would have been like 35,000, right around.
1865.
Okay. There's also, with the railroad, we see a success of towns based on railroad stops. So they impact towns and they impact settlement. If you don't have the railroad coming through your town, you are going to become a ghost town. All right?
Or ours, it's a highway.
Like what?
That's what happens in ours, the movie.
Oh, highway.
The highway.
Yeah. All right. There's also the whole transcontinental railroad that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Transcontinental. All right. And of course, we talked about Stanford, Union Pacific meet with the Central Pacific. So the Union Pacific and Central Pacific meet, and of course, remember when the railroad is connected and land begins to be settled, we see the end of the frontier. Right? Another important aspect of railroads here is corruption that comes along with railroads. We've got money from the government that wasn't being used appropriately. The credit mobilier scandal, all right. Other types of corruption. There was, of course, abuse of Chinese and other immigrant labor. And of course, there were some faulty tracks that were made just to make a dime. People were putting stuff down that wasn't necessarily good quality, but making money nonetheless. As the railroads developed, sort of the technology that was utilized by railroads to help make them more efficient, steel becomes a stronger, safer material to use. Also, improvements that are made as a result of railroads include we have standardized sizing for railroads, as well as what else was standardized? Standardized sizing, I mean like for the railroad tracks, so that way time zones. You bet. Standardized time. Yes. Okay. I have down here stock watering, which was used, I'm sorry, what's right there? Which was a technique used by people in the railroad industry to get more money from investors by making their stocks look a lot better than what they really were. So they also looked to bribe judges, these people did, who ran the railroads. Okay? All right. So that's railroads. Again, we're talking about reasons for industrial growth, why it took place, why it happened. I've got another one here I want to look at, and that is we'll take steel aside by itself and talk about Mr. Andrew Carnegie. Remember that steel was monopolized by Carnegie. Carnegie, of course, gave away $450 million prior to his death. He still had a castle in Scotland, though. That was pretty awesome. Couple of things to remember about the steel industry. America produces half the world's steel with the Bessemer process. We also have Carnegie. Carnegie himself is worth $1.4 billion. Now, to think about this and the amount of money that is present as a result of industrial growth here, $1.4 billion value on Andrew Carnegie is more money than the U.S. was worth, all the U.S. combined, in 1800. So if you think about it, there's a lot more money in our system, right, during this time. A lot of people have, and there's people that benefit from that when you have that amount available, okay? Because that means he didn't just have people work for free, he had to pay people too to make all this money, correct? So he's the top of the food chain. All right, the last aspect here of why the industrial growth took place in America was oil. Of course, to talk about oil, we have to talk about John Rockefeller. Rockefeller, at first, was using oil for kerosene. And while it looked pretty, what's that?
According to Glenn Beck, Rockefeller was communist.
Is that what you guys learned that from Glenn Beck? What?
We found out in Spanish.
Oh. Okay. So Rockefeller starts off making these oil lamps for people, right? And times are great. Things are looking good. He's got all this oil on his hands, and he's making this money, and then what happens? That causes his kerosene business to go kaput. The light bulb happens. So Thomas Edison was probably not on John Rockefeller's Christmas card list, okay? Probably didn't get anything from him. However, what saves the day for him? AT?
Well, I mean, I tried to find 1.4 billion. I couldn't find it, but I know just 1 million would be worth 24 million today. So.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
A lot.
That is a lot. All right, so hold on. Let's talk. Let's stay focused right here, though.
I'm sorry.
What bails him out? What bails out John Rockefeller, guys and gals? The automobile does. You betcha, Jordan. Thank you for being focused and being after it here. Okay, good. The automobile industry does it, definitely. Okay. Rockefeller consolidates his own oil supply and distribution, and he ends up with his consolidation here. But 95% control of oil in America, oil refineries. He's corrupt as well, though, a little bit, right? He uses some illegal tactics, such as rebates and spies to control the industry. Of course, you guys remember Standard Oil was his big big company. All right? So these four elements right here kind of lead to the growth, industrial growth in America. Chapter 10 also touches on the laissez-faire conservatism that was present at this time. All right? Basically, the laissez-faire conservatism is a government policy in the late 19th century that limits the scope of the federal government and in some respects gives the federal government control over industry. Or gives, whoa, backtrack. I just said that it was completely opposite. Gives industry some control in government, or control over government. All right, so hands-off approach, and industry takes advantage of it, and they're kind of the big dogs, all right, so to speak. Of course, with this laissez-faire conservatism, there is a responsibility that goes along with being wealthy, and so we see the gospel of wealth. The belief here that, hey, you know what? God gave everybody in the wealthy class money, so they have to be morally responsible for it. Yeah, he followed it. The idea of making sure that he's taking good care of his money in a responsible way and helping people when he can, morally being responsible with the money. There's also the idea here of social Darwinism. Which, of course, if you remember, it deals with the wealthy are wealthy because they deserve it. They are inherently better and superior to the poor. If you're poor, it's by your own shortcomings. So, hey, it's not luck, it's skill. You just stink.
Yeah. Yes, so.
Jeez, John, you kind of took that really literal there. All right, fair enough. Okay. Next up here. All right. So with all this industry going on, this laissez-faire government, we have to talk about the effects of this policy on workers. Of course, remember we have businesses become depersonalized during this time. People are used simply as tools for making money. They're not really seen as having any other value on top of that. And so they're merely seen, workers are, as a cog in the machine. And so it hurts creativity for those people who are working in these environments. Some of the effects here we have are the free enterprise or farmer is replaced by corporations. We see factories controlling life. We've got the Gibson Girl, all right, the Gibson Girl, which is an advertising campaign that encourages women to work in offices. Eli, taking notes here, man? 2/3 of people in America, as a result of this industrial movement here, become dependent on wage. They need their wages in order to survive. They're not like farmers who can sustain here. They need their wage, and so unemployment doesn't necessarily become based off of skill or lack of effort. It becomes a larger issue here because of the market itself and reductions in costs and everything else. All right. All right. So what the result is of all of this stuff that takes place here during this time, we see, of course, a push back, right? The pendulum always swings back and forth. And we see the start of union movements taking place here. The union movement starts because manual laborers are vulnerable. Okay, employers can always try to hire cheap immigrants, and so they're always at that tipping point where they're afraid they might lose their job. We also have machines displacing workers. Part of the union movement here, so we see these people start to organize, and then of course corporations try to make laborers organization impossible. So corporations rally. And some of the things that corporations would do to try to make labor organization impossible is they would control the legal process. They would hire lawyers and politicians they could corrupt into passing laws. They would employ scabs or strike breakers. They would have people sign yellow dog contracts, which is basically an ironclad agreement that said you would not join a union. And they would also create the company town. You ever seen the movie October Sky? Anybody? Where it's a mining town? Where they launch the rockets, yeah. It's a mining town, and so everything that they purchase is available at the town store, and so people start to owe their soul at the company store. They're always in debt to the company. All right. All right. So I think we got 30 seconds left. Let me stop this. Tomorrow